There we were, 2 years ago, my son and I on a beach playing, when this man walked by, smoking a cigarette. He threw it on the floor right next to us, and that disturbed me. So I got up, walked over and asked him politely whether he was leaving the cigarette butt for my son to play with, or maybe as food for the birds. He didn't like it. Didn't like my sarcasm, replied angrily, "Mind your business." He walked away. We were left there. We're polluting our natural habitat. We've had a biodiversity reduction of over 40% since the 1950s. We're set to have a catastrophic climate change if we don't get hold on global warming in the next 10 years. And bad news is we're still very far away from that. Now you may think, oh no, again one of those telling us the same story that we already know, but just knowing seems not to be enough. There's something deeper, more fundamental missing, and it has to do with consciousness and how we connect to nature. As many from my generation who have grown up with the knowledge of this threat, I wanted to do something about it. As a scientist and tech entrepreneur, I had technology solutions in mind, such as renewable energy or building machines to clean up the ocean. But after a while, I started realizing that all of this would most likely only address the symptoms of the problem. And while scaling those solutions to really have impact, we would create other problems. I started looking for the root cause. And the best idea I had was nothing new. A comedian had said it all in only 2 sentences. I quote, "The planet is fine. The people are," that word. So what does George want to tell us in such a nice and poetic way? Well, 1,000,000 years after we're gone, our ecosystems will most likely rebalance, so it'll be fine. But what about us? We're cutting off the very branch that we're sitting on, and we know it. And still we don't stop cutting. Instead, we invest our resources in more and more complex technological solutions to address the symptoms without looking at the root cause and doing something about it. The root cause is us. It's our behavior. But how do we change it? My story with a cigarette is just a stereotypical example of a person who behaves in a disconnected way on 3 levels. Disconnected from nature, polluting. Disconnected from other people, disregarding other people. And the worst, disconnected from himself. And this is where it can get pathological. If Carlin is right, we have to start with the latter. We have to start with looking at ourselves and understanding how we're disconnected. This to me seemed like a complex psychological question, so about 2 years ago I started working with experts from neuroscience and mental health to understand this. And this is what I've learned about disconnection. Nowadays, being mentally healthy is becoming almost the exception. According to European statistics, up to 4 out of 10 people would fulfill the criteria for a psychiatric disorder only over the past 12 months. Mental health is set to become the healthcare problem #1 in the next 10 years. And the main contributors are so-called mood disorders, such as depression, anxiety, or trauma, all of which can also lead to addiction. Today, we understand mood disorders in terms of brain connections. Simply put, how we're wired, right? The brain is not a solitary organ. Its many connections inside mirror the complexity of the world outside. It functions properly if it's in good connection and state of balance with our environment. But if we become stressed, anxious, or even addicted, we become more and more disconnected from the environment. We become trapped in maladaptive loops of thought and behavior. And this manifests as unhealthy, disconnected brain wiring. If these loops consolidate over time, then disconnected brain wiring becomes our everyday consciousness. And patients confirm it. Depression feels like a state of disconnectedness from oneself and the environment around. What is missing here are natural consciousness skills to reconnect to healthy brain wiring. We invest increasing amounts of money in technologies, pharmacological technologies, to substitute for healthy brain wiring. What we need is not more substitution to address the symptoms, but consciousness skills to work on its root causes. Do you see the similarity to the destruction of nature? What we need is not more substitution technologies to work on the symptoms, but consciousness skills to work on the root causes. A well-known approach to develop consciousness skills is mindfulness practice. It's also a novel trend in psychotherapy. Clinical evidence shows that developing consciousness skills such as meta-awareness, acceptance, and compassion towards oneself and others increases our psychological well-being in a more sustainable way. Nowadays, many people practice mindfulness. Many of you too, I guess. And this is great. I really believe this. But what we have to understand is that in an acute state of depression, significant mindfulness training would be necessary to reconnect to healthy brain wiring on our own. So what options do we have? Could there possibly be a technology which is compatible to mindfulness practice and that we can use to catalyze, deepen, or maybe even accelerate the development of consciousness skills? Well, I believe that there is such a technology. Psychedelic medicines. Many prominent research institutions, such as Johns Hopkins, Imperial College London, and also here in Zurich, the University Hospital of Psychiatry, have performed high-impact research with psychedelic medicines. This research shows that in high-quality therapeutic settings, psychedelics can be used safely to address a variety of psychiatric disorders, promising a fundamental shift in treatment paradigm. The shift looks like this. We have here the old paradigm. Substitution, classic antidepressants. We give them to patients for a few weeks just to see if there's any effect at all. If there is an effect, then patients need to continue taking these drugs on a daily basis. And here we have the new alternative. Clinical pilot studies in high-quality therapeutic settings show that only a few administrations of a psychedelic drug can lead to rapid and sustainable remission from symptoms for weeks or even months after the effect of the drug has passed, and without the need to take the drug on a daily basis. When I discovered these scientific findings, I was deeply impressed. Why? Well, this is clearly a different kind of technology, a consciousness technology that we can use to reconnect to healthy brain wiring. Unlike classic antidepressants, it does not aim to substitute for deficits in the brain. It transforms consciousness to a healthy and mindful state. Interestingly, patients who have been successfully treated in this way report a feeling of connectedness to themselves and their environment. And by the way, they also score high on mindfulness questionnaires. Okay, now, let's remember where psychedelic medicines actually come from. They are not some recent wonder drugs of Western psychiatry, and they're also not some party drugs from the 60s. Traditional healers around the globe have been using potent psychoactive plants and fungi for centuries, if not millennia. To give you an example, I'll need to take you on a trip to the Amazon. Many indigenous communities in the Amazon use ayahuasca for medicinal purposes. In ayahuasca ceremonies, traditional healers serve this psychoactive plant brew in a ritual setting. This ritual is at the heart of cultural identity and not some drug party on the outskirts of society. On the contrary, it is used to treat drug addictions. Indigenous people drink ayahuasca to cleanse body and soul from disease, to gain mental clarity for taking important personal and even political decisions, and to gain knowledge and wisdom. They intuitively understand that an essential part of this wisdom and the therapeutic properties of ayahuasca is the fact that humans and nature are deeply connected. In recent years, many Westerners have also started traveling to the Amazon in search of this powerful medicine. Next to anecdotes of impressive personal healing, many transformational insights are reported as well. The global ayahuasca survey finds that over 80% of Western ayahuasca drinkers experience a deep reconnection to the kingdom of plants and animals. Recent research by Forsman and colleagues emphasizes this reconnection. By interviewing thousands of people, they find that psychedelics promote what is generally known as deep ecological consciousness. Deep ecology means that we integrate nature into our self-image, and we see ourselves as part of nature and not superior to it. This is very interesting and in line with the traditions from the Amazon, but there is a second, even more interesting and in my view more important finding of this study, the consequence of developing such consciousness. They find that pro-environmental behavioral change is a reliable consequence of developing deep ecological consciousness. Let's take a moment to think about this. If we truly integrate nature into our self-image, then nature destruction feels like a direct personal pain. And apparently, this emotional experience is what we humans need to change our behavior. How can we care about nature if we're disconnected from it? How can we care about nature if we're disconnected from ourselves? If we don't even care about ourselves? In times when we're destroying our natural habitat, could possibly this deep reconnection to our healthy self and nature through transformation of consciousness be the most efficient way to change our behavior and to prevent the collapse of our ecosystems? On top, if there is a technology that we can use to transform rather than to substitute consciousness, wouldn't it be wise to use it? By reconnecting to our healthy self, to other humans, and to nature, my hope is that we will not only rebalance our mental health, but also our relationship with the natural world. And this is what I wish to leave behind for my children, your children, and the generations to follow. Thank you.